So you wanna be a picture book writer, then you gotta write picture books. And you're gonna need a bucket load of bright ideas for titles, plots, and hooks. If you're partial to prose or you're raring to rhyme, then repeat after me, it's a challenge, but I'm gonna tackle each story 1 month at a time with 12 by 12.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the 12 by 12 Picture Book Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome guest Caroline Perry, who is here to, among other things, chat with me about writing picture book biographies about famous women who are alive at the time of writing. and I say that because unfortunately Queen Elizabeth, who is the subject of your biography, did pass away shortly after your book came out, I think.
Shortly before, actually.
Before. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, so why don't you, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, go ahead and show your book so that everybody can see the cover. It's called The Corgi and the Queen.
Corgi and the Queen was my debut picture book that came out in 2022 with Macmillan.
And who is the illustrator?
Illustrator is Lydia Corrie. Fabulous.
Right. Okay. And mine is Song After Song, The Musical Life of Julie Andrews, written by me and illustrated by Ilaria Urbanati, published by Little Bee Books. And by the time this episode airs, it will be the beginning of Women's History Month. And so I thought this would be a fun topic to get into, since both of our subjects have certainly lived through a great deal of history. Julie just turned 90 in October. So why don't we start with the inspiration for writing the book?
So I was a journalist for many years, and I'm very curious about people's stories. And very often I learn from interviewing people, even very famous people, that the most interesting stories they have to tell are not the ones you'd expect at all. Everyone knows the Queen lived in a palace. Everyone knows that she had her son was going to be the next king, and then one of her grandsons be the next. We think we know a lot about this person, but what really makes these people tick? And of course, everyone also knew that she was inextricably associated with corgis. I think if you were to ask the most famous human pet connection in history, possibly the Queen and her corgis. And I wondered why it was that she had so many. Why did she love these dogs so much? Especially, they're amazing dogs, but they are not easy little lap dogs. They're very opinionated, can be quite bossy, and they're working dogs. They need a lot of stimulation, and very different to how she was. She had to be very measured and controlled in her life, her public-facing life. But the companions that she chose were very rambunctious and got in sometimes. And I just wondered, what was it about that connection? How did it form? Why did she stay so loyal to that breed throughout her very long life? And really just immersed myself in research. Of course, she had 96 years of life, so it's a lot to go on, reading very old newspaper clippings, documentaries, old radio broadcasts, and it just was really fascinating to me to discover that she received her own corgi. Her first one was an 18th birthday gift from her beloved father during the war, which was a very hard time, of course, for any child. Then she was separated from her family. Her parents' residence was a key target for the Nazis, and this puppy just meant everything to her. And I wanted to tell the story of a love story, really.
Yeah, which is what every dog story really is, you know. Right. So you were talking about how sometimes the lesser known aspects of a person's life are the most interesting or more interesting. And the same was true for me in writing about Julie Andrews. I wasn't interested in writing about her as Mary Poppins or Fräulein Maria or, any Victoria, even though I love those performances, and that is obviously how I was introduced to her. But I was more interested in how did she become Julie Andrews, right? Even with the Queen, she was ultimately destined for royalty in some capacity, although not necessarily.
She actually wasn't. She would have had a very anonymous life if her uncle hadn't abdicated, which
Right.
the odds of that happening were infinitesimally small. Her parents, she was living in a semi-detached house. They had no intention of raising their daughters in the spotlight. So she, as a child, had her whole world turned upside down. Suddenly, you go from being in the Girl Scouts and having a relatively normal existence to being told actually, you have no control of your destiny anymore. And
Yeah.
the thing she had control over was the companions that she chose, and in this case, the four-legged companions. So, like you said, sometimes it's those things which really shape a person's story behind the scenes and makes them the iconic figures that we see in
Right.
the magazines.
So there are some fun intersections between your book and my book, and I wanted to point out a couple. Obviously, Julie was made a dame by Queen Elizabeth, so they actually met at one point. But when I got the first, and this is something that I want to talk to you about too, with nonfiction, obviously everything has to be true, but there is true, and then there's emotional truth. And we know that people's memory even is not always perfect. And sometimes the way you feel about something is more truthful than what maybe actually happened. And so one of the things was the illustrator, Ilaria Urbanati, who did an amazing job with this book. I think the book starts off in a very quickly gets to a pretty harsh place where Julie is sent away from her father and her brother to go live with her mother in London, her mother having taken up with a Canadian singer named Ted Andrews. And to soften that a little bit, this is my guess, the illustrator chose to put a cat in this scene. And one thing I knew about Julie is she's a dog person. And so while I got from a kid-friendly point of view, the idea that if we put an animal in this scene, it doesn't necessarily have to be the animal that they had, but it will help with the emotional heaviness of it. So, but I couldn't let it be a cat. No offense to cat people. And so I just was going to show you what ended up going in the book. And if you can see that it's a corgi, right?
Yes.
And I'll have to ask Ilaria at some point. I don't know for sure if that was a nod to the Queen. I do know that at some point Julie did have a corgi and later went on to have miniature poodles, toy poodles, whatever. But she's definitely a dog person. So I thought that was kind of a fun,
very sweet
overlap. So let's talk a bit about the historical background since it is Women's History Month. And you mentioned that she got her first corgi was given to her by her father at the beginning of the war.
during World War II, beginning of the war, and she went on to serve in the war. She, I think to this day, is the only female member of the royal family who was in active military duty. She went against all protocol, and she was fixing engines and driving ambulances and trucks, and she became a really incredibly skilled mechanic and absolutely knew she had to help her country. And she was, even though she couldn't overtly say she was a feminist, she obviously was prevented from saying a lot of things that she felt. She did definitely break some traditions and boundaries during that time, and then later on as well. So, yeah, the war, I think, was a very transformative time in her life.
Mm-hmm. And the love of corgis, of course.
Well, she and her sister Margaret, who were sent to Windsor Castle away from her parents, they had to sleep in the basements of this castle, very cold, drafty, spiders everywhere. And true story, the crown jewels were actually hidden inside cookie jars in the cellar, and the dogs would be with the girls, and the air raid sirens would be screaming in the background, and Hitler apparently wanted to take Windsor Castle as his prize. So you can imagine for these young women, it was a very terrifying time, and the dogs just were such a great comfort, especially Susan, her first corgi, such a great comfort during that time and later on.
So that's fascinating. And another intersection, because when Julie went to go live with her mother in London, she was only 5 years old, and it was in the middle of the Blitz in World War II, which to this still amazes me, that her mother would have brought her there. And so she lived during that time in a very tiny apartment in a neighborhood called Mornington Crescent, which was not a very nice neighborhood at the time. And I actually went there when I was doing research for the book, and I found the apartment and I took some pictures because Julie describes the apartment as being, she had a basement, again, a basement room with a single light bulb, a bare bulb, and she had a nanny who stayed with her when her mother and Ted were out, doing their acts and whatnot. And when the air raids went off, they had to shelter in the underground station.
Mm-hmm.
And
still closed, I believe, Mornington Crescent. Yeah, we used to go through it. They closed that station quite a few years ago.
They did, really, because it was open when I went there. I took pictures and everything. But so there's a scene in the book where I'm just gonna, for those who may be watching on YouTube, because that ended up being a place where, music was always a big part of her life, and her stepfather, Ted, would bring his guitar and they would sing and whatnot. But one of the things that struck me so much was she mentioned this cigarette factory that was there at the time, and it had these two lions in the front. And that building is something else today. I'm not sure what it is, but I spotted it, and it was very close to the apartment. And it was a long way from there to the underground station. And it really struck me how terrifying that must have been for a 5-year-old girl on these tiny legs, with even now, it just, my heart goes out. And it's one of the things that helped me find the emotional moments to draw from. And I'm wondering if you have anything similar from your experience doing research, because you mentioned the basement and the dogs. And was there anything else that really kind of changed how you saw Elizabeth and the
I think
dog.
another really incredible moment was when I found out that she had hidden Susan in her wedding carriage on the day of her wedding to Prince Philip. And again, you can imagine how many people would have been against that particular decision. And it was just proof that she really saw this dog as her best friend, and she did not want to have this huge, I mean, it was the post-war years. People were sending the Queen their ration coupons to get material for her wedding dress. Like, it was still in rationing, and of course she returned them all. But after so much heartache and tragedy, it was a huge spectacle. And she was naturally a very introverted person, so I think it would have been quite challenging for her. So to have her best friend quite literally by her side on the floor in the honeymoon carriage, just such an incredible visual in my mind of how special
it really is. So she may have been had the first official emotional support animal, number one. And number two, little did she know that it would one day become a trend to have your dogs in your weddings.
And also corgis at one point in the UK, because they're working dogs. They're bred to herd cattle, actually, and they were very much fallen out of favor before she popularized them, and she's single-handedly responsible for the breed's resurgence, and certainly overseas as well. I think most people had never heard of this little dog from Wales until they saw pictures of her on the front cover of Vanity Fair with her little pack of corgis. So she actually did a lot for the breed as well.
Yeah. I was going to say, when you say they're working dogs, that is not my experience with them here in the States. And I think probably because of the fascination with Queen Elizabeth and
because they look so cute. The Instagram.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. But most of the corgis people who own corgis, and the corgis that I know of, are very pampered, beloved pets.
But it's difficult, and I've had to discover. A lot of people would email me when this book came out, and my daughter really wants a corgi, and I'd speak to people in some corgi rescue charities, and they would say, people, again, because they look cute, they don't understand how much stimulation, how much exercise, how vocal they are. They try and herd their owners for a while. They need so much training and stimulation, and a lot of them unfortunately end up being rehomed because they think that they're little lap dogs, and they're really not. They're incredible, but they are, they need a job and they need stimulation. So sometimes I think the Queen would have advocated for doing breed research first. And she had obviously hundreds of acres. She loved nothing more than hiking out in the misty hills of Scotland, for hours on end with the dogs. And that's when they're happiest. I think that's when she was happiest, and that's when the dogs were happiest. And there's a lovely true story about her, which one of her staff members mentioned before she passed away, which was her corgis learned when she was on Queen mode or when she was on corgi companion mode. If she came into the corgi room, they had their own room in Buckingham Palace. If she came in wearing her headscarf, they would all jump up excitedly. It's walkie's time. If she came in her tiara, they would slump down disappointedly because they knew she was going to an official function and wouldn't be able to take them on a long romp through the garden. So it's quite funny to picture that. Yes. Queen or tiara queen today.
That's so sweet, and also so indicative of the intelligence of, and of course, being a fellow dog person myself, it is always endears me to somebody if they also love their dogs the way I love my dogs, and it humanizes them. It's also a great hook for a children's picture book biography. Did you always know that you are British, correct? And so I'm curious how did you know you wanted to write about the Queen and then went looking for a story, or did you know that you wanted to write about her relationship with Susan, the first corgi, and then
I wanted to find out why she loved him so much. And again, didn't have much interest in just writing a straight biography of her. I'm sure there are plenty of adult biographies of her. That probably in the UK, there's probably a couple of straight picture book biographies of her. I wanted a new hook, and again, the dog hook is wonderful, but it didn't have to be a dog. I think every child can relate to not being able to share certain things with the adults in their lives, and having difficult emotions that perhaps they can't express or they internalize. And whether it's a pet or a stuffed animal or just something else that they can entrust with their feelings and deepest emotions. And I think every child across the world has that. None of us can relate to living in a palace. None of us can relate to, like Julie Andrews, being this incredible award-winning soprano. Very few people can relate to that, but we can all relate to those feelings of isolation and fear and wanting to be accepted for who we are. And I think with the Queen, the corgis were her conduit for that. And everyone has something.
Yes.
A lovey, a blankie, a cat, a hamster, a pen pal. I mean, it just felt very universal to me. And I've had a lot of parents have contacted me saying that their child has really connected to that part of the story, which is very touching and exactly what I hoped would happen.
Yes, yes. And likewise, for me, the Julie as a young girl who didn't have much control at all, pretty much zero control over her own life and her own destiny. She didn't even enjoy singing at the beginning because it was her stepfather teaching her, and she didn't really like him very much. And they were in a bomb shelter, you know, during this time, and they were all crammed together. And by then she had at least one and maybe both brothers. So, you know, you can imagine being in this totally cramped space, being told to do something that you don't want to do. And I think kids can relate to being told to do something that they don't want to do, that they don't enjoy doing. But ultimately, I think the corgi, if you will, in my book, is her music teacher, Madam Lillian. Or Lillian Stiles Allen, who became very much a mother figure to her and really drew out her voice and taught her to love singing. And that was a turning point where she realized that she had a gift that she could give to others. And so that's what I wanted kids to take away. At least one of the things that I wanted them to take away is that whatever your gift is, you know, you could be good at sports or math, or for us, writing, or, you know, but doing it in such a way to the best of your ability that you're giving part of you and giving your gifts to make the world a better place. And then one last intersection, which you may or may not be, but the penultimate scene in Song After Song is when Julie sings at the Royal Palladium Theatre at the Royal Command performance. And I say she's singing in front of the Queen, who is actually not Queen Elizabeth, but right, the Queen Mother. She was, but Elizabeth and Philip were engaged, and they were in the audience. And this was one of the first royal one of the first outings. But this was also a huge turning point for Julie in her career. So that's part of why I wanted to have you here today, was because I thought it was so fun how our characters sort of walked this journey in time and kind of came together at this particular moment, which was a big transition time for Elizabeth as well. She's on the verge of getting married, and Julie is here, still a very young child, but this kind of catapulted her, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yes.
So you did a lot of really amazing marketing for for your book. And I remember just seeing it everywhere. I think it was even mentioned in People, wasn't it? Was it People magazine? So
like 4 or 5 times.
yeah, can you just talk a little bit about what you did that you felt made it such a huge success marketing wise?
I think perhaps I'm slightly different to some other authors in that I write books with news hooks in mind. Everything I've written, I try to be the first on a subject or have a totally new hook, because I think it's a lot harder to market. Let's just say it's a kindness book, and it's beautiful, lyrical kindness book. As an editor of my previous magazine or newspaper editor myself, how would that hook me and intrigue me enough to want to feature it in my publication? So I think for me, it starts from my idea generation. I'm just like, how can I get this? How can I get people interested in reading this story? So that I will discard a lot of ideas, even if I really like them, if I don't think it has any marketing hooks. So that's I kind of start right at the beginning. And of course, I also knew that the Queen, well, you never know for sure. Obviously, tastes change, things change, global events happen. But certainly I knew that corgis were I really had a sense they were going to have their kind of pop culture moment. And I was right, like they're everywhere now, aren't they? They've become really on socks, and every store you walk into, you'll see corgis on things. So I kind of sensed that was going to happen. And I just thought it was an incredible, beautiful, timeless story as well. So I hope the Queen would have been alive when the book came out, but she did get to see an earlier draft of it. My daughter, when Prince Philip died, my daughter wanted to send her a card. She drew her a beautiful corgi and said, "I'm very sorry that your husband died." And we sent her an early, just a manuscript. And we got a lovely letter back from her lady in waiting saying that the Queen had read it, and really, it was really touching, actually. And my daughter was over the moon. And my daughter ended up being interviewed for primetime Japanese TV about the book and about the letter that she received. So it was really, really special. And Lydia, who illustrated this book, I just think she did such a spectacular job. These mid-century style images are just gorgeous. And
they really are. They really
couldn't have looked any more beautiful. And even under the front cover, there's enough.
Oh, yes. So for those of you who are listening, she has undies,
Yes,
which is the Queen, an older Queen surrounded by corgis.
yes.
So yes,
showing her the young Queen as an older Queen. The product, I could not have been more delighted with how the book turned out. So kudos to everyone involved, because as you know, there are many people involved in a book.
Yes.
And everyone on this book just did a beautiful job. So very thankful.
Yeah. I have an undie too.
I love undies. Gorgeous. Right.
Gorgeous. And so if you're listening, it's Julie as a young girl leaning toward a rose, and her reflection is in what isn't the Thames River,
Mm-hmm.
And the reflection is Mary Poppins with the
So clever.
Oh, excuse me.
So clever.
Yes. So that's really amazing that you got this lovely note. And I wonder if, did you feel pressure in writing the book because everybody knows who the Queen is? Did
Yeah.
that add a layer for you? And how did you manage that?
Definitely, there's a lot of pressure that comes with writing about, as you know, a very well-known person, especially some people are very well versed on the subject and perhaps will be scouring it looking for things. And as you said, certainly with people who are in their 90s, but some of the documentation from their early years, it's either hard to come by or you can read two newspaper articles from that time and they'll both say slightly different things. So I was very nervous and I had to actually create, which was a lot of work. I was really worried about this. I had to make for the back matter family trees of both Queen Elizabeth and the corgis.
Oh, of course, the corgis, right?
That was very hard.
Oh my gosh. Put that back up again. So for those listening, the trees have a sort of backsplash, and on the corgi side it's a silhouette of a corgi, and on the Queen side it's a silhouette of the crown jewel.
And the corgis had such incredible names. You know, we've got Whiskey, Dagger, Diamond, Apollo, Disco, Rufus, Mars, Sweep, Socks. It's some incredible names, which you wouldn't necessarily associate with the Queen. But yeah, she had at least 30 corgis who were all directly descended from Susan because she loved that dog so much that she wanted to kind of keep her legacy going. And she stopped the royal corgi lineage in 2018 because she didn't want any of her corgis to outlive her, which was also a very selfless decision. She ended up being gifted 2 corgi puppies during the pandemic. It wasn't her decision, but it must have been very, very sad for her to say this is my last dog that was descended from Susan, but also probably a responsible decision as well.
Wow.
But I can only, having spent so many years and months immersed in this story, I can only imagine how she must have felt having to do that. So yeah, I mean, when Susan died, she wrote a beautiful note to the vet who tried to save her life, just thanking him so much for trying, and she chose the inscription for Susan's headstone. So yeah, just things that we can all relate to in our own non-royal ways.
Right.
I think it's a beautiful love story, and it still gets me a little poked now when I read it.
I know. I know. And then I remember, as I'm sure everyone who watched the funeral or, you know, the corgis, do you remember? I was just like, oh.
Yeah, and her
Just
yes,
really,
and she had orchestrated. Obviously, she'd designed her own funeral, so
right.
she made it very clear how important they were in her life, even in death. So it was, that was a real challenging not to cry moment when we saw that. And the illustrator and I actually, who we became good friends during the process of, because of course when we had no idea she was not going to be with us when the book was published, because as you know, books take a very long time between acquisition and publication. And we'd made a trailer together, and we'd made marketing materials. And of course, then the Queen passed away. I think not even 2 months before the book came out. It was like a few weeks before. And I remember I was on the phone to Lydia, and Lydia's in the UK, and we were both just crying because we had to change everything to past tense. Just sort of on the eve of the book's launch, and it felt really quite overwhelming actually, because we'd been working on this together for so long.
Yeah.
And in subsequent printings, the first printing, the ending was in present tense because, of course, they weren't anticipating her to die. But second and third printing, they changed it to, past tense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite the journey, this book.
I would say so. I would say so. And yeah, I just thought randomly of another intersection that's not in either of our books, but uh, in the days preceding the funeral, over Buckingham Palace, they had like the big screens and they had different people record tributes to the Queen. And Julie was one of those who recorded a tribute. And I, from my own perspective on writing about somebody so well known, I it essentially was paralyzing for the first few years. And anybody who's heard me talk about this book knows it took 10 years from idea to publication, because I was I'm very good friends with Emma Walton Hamilton, who is Julie's daughter. So that was an extra responsibility. But I felt, and I wanted Julie to be happy with the book, even though she did read some drafts and give some feedback, but it wasn't as if I was working with her on it. But I wanted her to be happy with it, and I wanted her multitudes of fans to really be happy with it. And ultimately, I hope they are. I know Julie is, because I did see her after, and I was when the ARC first came out, and she said it was beautiful and that she loved it. And so, to me, that's really all that matters. But what I had to do was forget about them for a while in order to really bring myself and my heart into it, because it was quite sterile initially. I had to let it go ultimately so that I could write a book first and foremost that reflected my feelings about her story and all of that. And I wish I had known earlier in the process. This was the first and so far only picture book biography that I've written, and it was definitely a big learning curve getting that emotional through line. And the old cliche that you have to write for yourself first is unfortunately very true. you know?
And I think if there's always a danger when I used to do magazine interviews, and publicists always want copy approval, and I understand why they do, but if it's offered too early, like if sometimes, and then the subject comes back and they're too close to the story in a way, so they don't know what the heart is. They can't find. I always say I look for the North Star of a story when I'm looking at somebody's life. And as you know, I have Messi's Magic is my newer biography. And you're looking at someone's life and you've got all the achievements here, and then you've got the struggles here, and then you've got so many other elements. And it takes an outsider often to look at all those elements and say, what makes this sing? What is them? It's very rarely the achievements that are the most, for me anyway, the most interesting part of a person. It's what is their engine, what made them tick, and what usually it's some challenging situation they faced that gave them the impetus to become great, to become different, to do something extraordinary. And I think if you're too close to a story, perhaps you can't see that. You want to focus more on your achievements or your speaking tours that you did. Or so, like you said, you want the subject to be happy, and that's very important. But I think sometimes having that in the forefront of your mind when you're writing can be disabling, can be paralyzing. So yeah, there is something I learned in my journalistic career. It takes a while. And just trusting yourself and knowing that you're trying to do justice to the story and to paint the person in an incredible light, but to also make more people interested in their story. Because if it's just a dry achievements list, the reach is actually going to be much smaller than if you're finding the heart and the area to connect. And I think everyone has, no matter how distant somebody seems from you and from your life and your career, there's always something that you have in common with them. Always.
Without a doubt. Absolutely.
And when you find that, you think, wow, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can all be friends.
And it becomes quite intense when you spend all this time writing about somebody. One of the things that I hadn't anticipated was when I got the inevitable rejections of the various versions of the story that went on submission, it wasn't just difficult for me as the author. I felt like it was a rejection of her too. And that almost made it worse. You know, that feeling was almost worse for me. And I started thinking maybe I've gotten a little bit too close to this subject, but you know, ultimately it's like when somebody's mean to your kids, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, I would rather you be mean to me.
Yes.
You know, that's sort of like, you can go ahead and reject me if you want, but how dare you reject this story?
Yeah, I mean, my kids hate it when I write biographies because I really have this full immersion approach, and just it's all I will talk about. We're having dinner and I'll just bring up some random fact about some person that they don't even know much about, and they're just like,
right,
another biography, mom, like just stop. It really holds your brain hostage for however long you're working on the project. And I think in order to write a good biography, I feel that, again, my process, that's really essential. That's actually a good litmus test for me when I'm thinking about writing a biography. And as you know, biography is now having a challenging time in the market. If I start outlining the story and I start doing all my research, and if it's not keeping me awake at night, and if I'm not desperate as soon as I've dropped my kids off to dive into more research and find out some more random facts about this person, then why should other people care? Why should readers care about this story? So many times I've done that. I've started the process and I spent a few weeks just diving in, and then I'm like, actually, this is not grabbing me in the way that the others did. I'll just leave it
that's a good litmus test.
Yeah,
I think that's why I've started research on a couple of other biographies and then dropped them, and I think that's probably, without realizing that that's why I was doing it, probably what was going on. That and knowing ahead of time how much work it is, you know.
People underestimate how much work it is.
I had stars in my eyes when I started this one, you know. Before our time runs out, I did want to ask you also about the memory cake, which is yes, so beautiful, the illustrations in this book. And this is based on your grandmother in World War II in Malta. And so again, similar period of history. And although this is not a biography, there are historical elements in it. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that and what makes
this story is incredibly close to my heart, and it's based on true story, and the true story of Malta, which most people in the States wouldn't be able to pick Malta out on a map. It's a tiny island, 8 miles by 15 miles in size, and it, I believe to this day, is still the most heavily bombed place on earth. They were absolutely inundated with aerial attacks from the Nazi Germans and from the fascist Italians. Wasn't there war? Malta's been colonized many, many times. And because of their location there, midway between Europe and Africa, Hitler wanted to take Malta because then he could have potentially taken both continents. And the extraordinary thing about this story, and every single civilian was impacted. Of course, there were a lot of fatalities. Everyone had to live underground for very extended periods. You can imagine disease and terror. I mean, nobody was spared. And had the civilians surrendered at any point, the whole outcome of the war would have been different. And which is why it really surprises me that it isn't taught here, the importance of this story. The entire population of Malta was between 7 and 10 days away from absolute starvation when a fleet of ships, which had been heavily bombed by the Germans, limped into the harbour, and they sank literally seconds after they managed to take the food off these ships, which is why they have this, you see the fireworks on the front cover. The biggest festa, the biggest celebration on the island every year is on August the 15th, and that was the day that these ships arrived. It also happens to be my birthday, so there's some coincidences there. But again, such a powerful story, and talking about women's history, we know a lot about the fighters on the front line in the wars, don't we? There are a lot of books written from that perspective. All too often, I think, the women's side of the conflict is left out, and certainly my grandmother and every person on the island, but they endured great suffering and silent suffering. And it was their resilience and fortitude which really helped to turn the tide of the war, not for Malta, but for the whole world. And I think, tragically now, there are more armed conflicts than at any time since the 1940s. And women, as we know, are very often the victims of these conflicts. They are the ones that don't have any say in what happens. They aren't the warmongers, are they? And I think we really need to remember these stories, and now more than ever to amplify them, to try and advocate for peace and for diplomacy, and to protect those who are the most vulnerable. So this is a very important story for me, and very happy that it's out in the world and representing. I did the launch at the Maltese Embassy in Washington. The ambassador invited me because it's the first book that tells the story for children. So
yeah. That's incredible, and it ultimately hopeful, I think. It gives me hope at this particular point in time in history when we are in a situation where we're not sure what the outcome will be of certain things that are happening.
yeah.
And the idea that this tiny population on this tiny island could have made such a huge difference in the course of history just by refusing to give up. That gives me a lot of hope, actually.
Absolutely. And again, this book, it does not hold back. I mean, it mentions a lot of hard things, and it infers that a death happened in the family, obviously in a child-friendly way. And in the art, we have pictures from the underground shelters. Jennifer Bricking did an incredible job with the art. But it does end on a note of hope, not on a Pollyanna, everything's going to be wonderful. But so once the Nunna has taken her through some of the harder things that happened during the war, and then the granddaughter, she says, at bedtime, I asked Nunna how she learned to be happy again after seeing so much sadness. A good life has layers, just like a good cake, she says. I've had lots of happy layers, and you have so many left to make. Back on my noisy street, in my busy city, far away from the ocean, I find a handwritten note in my suitcase. It's the recipe for Nunna's special cake, the one that tastes of birthdays and festas and family and peace. It's the most delicious thing. So it's also about carrying on the torch, intergenerational relationships, and also just not forgetting the stories of the older generations, because we can learn so much from what they've been through. And like you said, there are echoes of those things happening right now.
If only people would listen to women.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think we could sum up almost all of history with that statement, right? But
And I think doing what artists and authors and creators are doing now, it's so important to keep these stories alive. And I think the complacency we've seen in the electorate in many countries, haven't we? We've forgotten what happened in the 1940s and before that, which wasn't actually that long ago. And had we kept these stories at the forefront, perhaps people would have made different decisions, I think. I would hope.
Well, we'll see. It was lovely chatting with you. And of course, we just got to see each other somewhat recently at the NCTE conference. And I just wanted to give a shout out for I Am Not Happy, the very lovely book about the quokka who looks happy all the time. What else do you have? Do you have anything in the pipeline?
I have, I'm going to go grab it because it's such a cute cover. This has a companion title coming out in September with Simon & Schuster called I Am Not Grumpy, with a rain frog, the cutest little rain frog with a very grumpy face, but she's a misunderstood amphibian, and we're going to introduce children to the term resting frog face.
I was just about to say, how are you going to avoid that?
My RFF is ever present these days, I have to say, my resting frog face. But Sydney Hansen is the illustrator of this, and she's illustrating I'm Not Grumpy. She's phenomenal, and I wish I could share the cover, and just so
well. We'll put your website and the books in the show notes and all of that. But it's, as always, just lovely to talk to you, and I'm so happy that we got a chance to connect over some of the connections in our books that we haven't explored yet. Okay, so before we conclude, one question that I like to ask all of my guests is, if you could have written any book, which one would it be and why?
It would be Dandy by Amy Dykman, illustrated by Charles Santoso. And I just think it is the perfect picture book. It's funny, it's absolutely bursting with heart, and it's fresh. It's a fresh topic that everyone can relate to. One of those dads who's obsessed with something and having to have things perfect and orderly, and a little girl who just breaks that chain and shows what really matters. I just absolutely love it. I never get tired of reading that. I read it aloud to my kids hundreds of times, and it's just picture book perfection. Well done.
I agree. I love that book so much. She names the dandelion Charlotte.
Yes.
Is that
also so sweet.
Like just that little tiny detail, you know, of
and it's what we were talking about earlier about having something, whether it's a pet or a flower or a weed in your garden, that just speaks to you and that you can, and it means so much to you. And it took a while for the parent to see how important that was to her. So it was kind of a very subtle, non-didactic message in there for all of us as parents and caregivers and people who love kids. It's just a gorgeous book.
Great answer. Yes. Thanks everybody for tuning in today, and we would love it if you liked the podcast and subscribed and left comments or reviews wherever you get your podcasts from. And we will see you next time. Thanks. Ciao for now.
Okay.
Do it together so never you fear. It's a handy little way to help you kick into gear. You're amazing, exciting. Look out, 'cause you're writing 12 by 12. 12 manuscripts. 12 by 12. 12 picture books. 12